A storm, a desperate woman, a cold-hearted duke. When Rosalind Beaumont begs for shelter at Blackwood Manor, she's given one night. But in a house built on secrets, a single night is all it takes for a deadly plot to unfold. The Duke offered her a roof, never expecting that by sunrise she would be the only person standing between him and his grave. What she discovers in the shadows of the night will change both of their lives forever. The rain was not merely falling, it was attacking. Each drop was a cold, silver needle driven by a wind that howled like a grieving widow. Rosalind Beaumont pressed a hand to the bleeding cut on her temple, a stark reminder of the tree branch that had nearly ended her flight. She was soaked, her simple wool dress heavy with mud and misery, her worn boots threatening to disintegrate with every agonizing step. Behind her, miles back, was the village of Oakhaven. Behind her was the smug, accusing face of Mr. Gower, the town apothecary, who had seen her father's successful medical practice as a threat, and her, after her father's death, as an opportunity. He had blamed her for Mrs. Alderley's fever, conveniently forgetting his own poultices had made the woman worse. Witchcraft, he'd whispered. Unnatural methods, he'd proclaimed. The whispers had become shouts, and the shouts had become a mob. So, Rosalind had run. Now, the forest had given way to an imposing iron gate, twisted into the shape of thorny vines. Beyond it, at the end of a long, winding drive, stood a house. No, house was too small a word. It was a fortress of granite and shadow, a Gothic marvel of sharp towers and unblinking dark windows that seemed to absorb the lightning rather than reflect it. Blackwood Manor. Desperation clawed at her throat, more potent than the cold. She had no choice. Rosalind limped up the drive, her legs shaking. She used the heavy brass knocker, the sound swallowed by the storm. She waited, shivering, then knocked again, harder, using the last of her strength. Bolts screeched in protest. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a man's face, aged and skeptical, illuminated by a single candle. "We are not receiving visitors," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "Please," Rosalind begged, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form the words. "I am lost. The storm, I only ask for shelter. A barn, a stable, anything. Just until morning." The man, clearly the butler, looked her up and down. He saw the mud, the torn dress, the desperation. His gaze was not unkind, but it was deeply weary. "I am sorry, miss, but the Duke will see her, Abernathy." The new voice was not a request, it was a command, deep and resonant, vibrating with an authority that seemed to quiet the storm itself. The butler, Mr. Abernathy, stepped back, opening the door fully. He stood in the center of the vast, marble-floored entryway, a fire roaring in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. He was tall, dressed in impeccable black, his dark hair uncombed as if he'd been running his hands through it. His face was a masterpiece of aristocratic angles, but it was a cold masterpiece. He was Alistair Vane, the Duke of Blackwood, a man rumoured to be as hard and unforgiving as the granite of his home. His eyes, a startling, cold grey, swept over her, missing nothing. He saw her terror, her exhaustion, and, she felt, the very core of her soul. "One night," the Duke said, his voice flat. "The storm is the only reason I open my door. You will be given a room in the servants' wing. You will not be seen, you will not be heard, and you will be gone by dawn. Is that understood?" Rosalind could only nod, a wave of dizziness washing over her. "Yes, Your Grace. Thank you, Your Grace." "Mrs. Davies," he called, not raising his voice, yet the sound carried. A moment later, a woman in a stiff black dress, with a face that looked permanently displeased, appeared from a hallway. "See that she is given a room, and some dry things, something plain." Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, looked at Rosalind with open distaste. "This way, girl." Rosalind followed, casting one last, fleeting glance at the Duke. He had already turned his back on her, staring into the flames, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. He looked like a man entirely alone, trapped in his own magnificent, cold prison. Mrs. Davies marched her up 3 flights of stairs, down a narrow, cold corridor, and into a room that was little more than a cell. A narrow bed, a wash-stand, a single candle. "The kitchens are closed," the housekeeper snapped. "Do not light that candle. The draught is a fire hazard. And do not leave this room. You will be brought bread and water. Be grateful." She left, locking the door from the outside. Rosalind sank onto the thin mattress. The sound of the lock clicking into place sent a fresh jolt of fear through her, but it was overshadowed by a profound, bone-deep relief. She was dry. She was, for the moment, safe. The Duke was cold, the housekeeper a dragon, but they were not the mob from Oakhaven. She was wrong, however, on one crucial point. She was not safe at all. She had just traded a village of superstitious fools for a house that held a far more sophisticated and infinitely more deadly secret. She had been offered shelter, but she had just walked into a trap, not set for her, but for the very man who had just saved her from the storm. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and fitful, populated by the faces of the Oakhaven villagers and the cold, appraising stare of the Duke of Blackwood. Rosalind woke with a start, her heart hammering against her ribs, the house silent around her. The storm had lessened to a persistent, dreary drumming on the roof. She was thirsty. Mrs. Davies had, in her efficient cruelty, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately omitted, the promised bread and water. Rosalind's throat felt as if it were full of sand. The lock was a problem, but as she inspected it, she found the mechanism old and the wood around it slightly warped. She was the daughter of a man who valued practical knowledge. She knew how to jimmy a simple lock. Using the thin metal stay from her worn-out corset, she pressed it into the keyhole. After several agonizing minutes of probing and scraping, she heard a satisfying, quiet click. She eased the door open, wincing at the faint creak of the hinges. The servants' corridor was pitch black. She felt her way along the wall, her stockinged feet silent on the cold floorboards, navigating by memory toward the main staircase. She wouldn't dare go to the kitchens. A glass of water from a pitcher in the main hall, perhaps. Anything. As she reached the top of the grand staircase, the vast darkness of the entry hall below was broken by a sliver of light from a partially open door. Voices. Hushed, but sharp with anger. "Cannot keep leveraging the estate, Alistair. The mines in Cornwallis are a pit we are throwing good money into. That pit, Julian, funds the livelihoods of 300 families. I will not have them turned out." Families. The second voice was smoother, laced with a mocking charm. Always the humanitarian. They are miners, Alistair. They expect hardship. We, on the other hand, have a reputation to maintain. Our creditors are growing impatient. Curiosity, a trait her father had always encouraged, warred with her fear. Rosalind crept down the stairs, pressing herself into the deep shadows of the balustrade. She could just see into the room, the Duke's study. Alistair stood by the window, a rigid silhouette against the rain-lashed glass. Facing him was another man, younger, extraordinarily handsome, with blonde hair and a perfectly tailored coat. He was smiling, but it was the smile of a predator. "You speak of reputation?" Alistair said, his voice low and dangerous. Yet you are the one seen at the tables at Boodle's every night. You are the one whose debts I am constantly asked to settle." "I am cultivating influence," the man named Julian snapped, his charm vanishing. "Something you should try. Instead, you lock yourself away in this mausoleum, mourning a woman who has been dead for 2 years. Elspeth is gone, Alistair. It's time you rejoined the living, or at least let me manage the assets of the dead." The Duke moved so fast, Rosalind almost cried out. He crossed the room in 2 strides and seized Julian by the lapels. "Do not!" he snarled. "Speak my wife's name. You have my answer. The mines remain open. You will receive not 1 more shilling this quarter. Now get out." Julian, Lord Julian Vane, the Duke's cousin and heir, raised his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish, Your Grace. But you are making a terrible mistake." He smoothed his coat, his composure instantly restored. He walked to the door, and as he stepped into the hall, his eyes scanned the darkness. Rosalind froze. She was hidden, she was sure of it. But she felt his gaze like a physical touch. It swept past her, then, impossibly, snapped back. He peered into the shadows of the staircase, and a slow, calculating smile spread across his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't point her out. He simply looked at her, held her gaze for a terrifying second, and then, with a slight, almost mocking bow in her direction, he turned and walked to the front door, letting himself out into the dying storm. Rosalind's blood ran colder than the rain. He had seen her. He knew she was there. Shaken, she abandoned her quest for water and fled back to her room, locking the door behind her. She had not only seen the Duke's private anger, she had been seen by his enemy. She had stumbled into a war she did not understand. Later, much later, she heard heavy, uneven footsteps in the main hall. A door slammed. Then, a cry of pain, sharp and choked, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of a body falling to the floor. It was followed by a frantic ringing of the servant's bell, and Mr. Abernathy's voice, raw with panic. "My lord, your grace, someone, fetch Dr. Howell, quickly!" Rosalind stood frozen, her hand on the door. Mrs. Davies had warned her to stay put. The Duke had commanded her to be invisible. But that cry, it was not the sound of anger. It was the sound of agony. Rosalind did not hesitate for more than a second. The order to stay hidden was a social one. The sound of a human being in genuine distress was a moral imperative. Her father, Dr. Elias Beaumont, had taught her that. "We do not play at medicine, Rosalind," he'd said. "We answer the call. Always." She unlocked her door and ran, all thoughts of stealth gone. She burst into the Duke's study to a scene of chaos. Alistair Vane was on the floor, half propped against his desk, his face a ghastly shade of pale grey. He was gasping, his breaths shallow and wet, and his hand was clawed over his stomach. The glass he had been holding was shattered on the floor, its dark contents, brandy, she presumed, pooled on the expensive Persian rug. Mr. Abernathy was kneeling beside him, uselessly dabbing at the Duke's brow with a handkerchief. "He's been like this for weeks," the butler was babbling, his composure gone. "The headaches, the stomach pains, but never this bad. Dr. Howell is on his way, Your Grace." "Hold on." Rosalind took in the scene with a physician's eye. The Duke's pupils were contracted to mere pinpricks. A faint, bluish tint was visible around his lips. He was convulsing, a fine tremor that shook his powerful frame. "He doesn't have time to wait for a doctor," Rosalind said, her voice cutting through the panic with an authority that surprised even herself. Abernathy looked up, seeing her for the first time. "Miss, you must not be here. Go back to your room." "I am Rosalind Beaumont," she said, kneeling opposite him. My father was Dr. Elias Beaumont. I know these symptoms. He has been poisoned." "Poisoned?" Abernathy recoiled. "That is an outrageous accusation. The Duke suffers from a nervous stomach." "A nervous stomach does not cause cyanosis or meiosis," Rosalind snapped. She leaned closer to the Duke's face, sniffing his breath. It wasn't the brandy she smelled. It was something else. A faint, earthy, slightly bitter scent. Aconite. Wolfsbane. She had seen it once before, when a farmer had accidentally ingested it, mistaking it for horseradish. He needs to avoid his stomach. "Now," she commanded, "get me a strong solution of salt water, and another of mustard, and bring hot water bottles and every blanket you can find. He is going into shock." Mrs. Davies appeared at the door, her face white. "What is the meaning of this? The vagrant, she—" "Do it!" Rosalind roared, with a fury that made the housekeeper jump. "Or do you want to explain to the coroner how you stood by while your master died?" The raw, undeniable truth of the Duke's condition broke through their social conditioning. Mrs. Davies turned and ran. Abernathy, his hands shaking, moved to help. Alistair's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, clouded with agony. He looked at Rosalind, his gaze uncomprehending. "Your Grace," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You have been poisoned. I'm going to help you, but it will not be pleasant. You must trust me." He gave the faintest possible nod. Rosalind loosened his cravat and collar. When Mrs. Davies returned with a pitcher of salt water, Rosalind lifted the Duke's head. "You must drink this, Your Grace. All of it." He choked and sputtered, but with Abernathy's help, they forced most of it down him. The effect was immediate and violent. The Duke wretched, his body convulsing as he expelled the contents of his stomach onto the floor. "Again!" Rosalind ordered, taking the mustard solution. "Miss, you will kill him!" Mrs. Davies cried, hiding her face. "I am saving him," Rosalind said, her jaw tight. They administered the second emetic. More retching, until he was bringing up nothing but bile. He collapsed back, his body limp, his breathing still dangerously shallow. "Now the blankets," she ordered. They covered him, and Abernathy placed the hot water bottles around his torso. "What was it?" Abernathy whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Rosalind dipped a finger into the spilled brandy on the rug and tasted it, a minuscule, dangerous drop. Her tongue tingled. "Aconite! It's in the brandy." "But that is His Grace's private decanter," Abernathy said, his blood draining from his face. "Only I and Dr. Howell. We've been adding his tonic to it." For his headaches, Rosalind stared at him. "His tonic? From Dr. Howell?" "Yes, a new prescription, just this past week." The butler's words trailed off as the horrifying implication settled over them. The front door burst open, and a portly, red-faced man bustled in, carrying a black bag. "What is all this commotion? I was called for a stomach ache, not a good heavens." He stopped short at the scene. The Duke on the floor, the mess, and Rosalind, a stranger, covered in well. She was a mess. "Dr. Howell," Abernathy said, his voice trembling. "What is she doing?" Dr. Howell bellowed, pointing at Rosalind. "Get away from him, girl. You've probably made him worse." He rushed to the Duke's side and felt for a pulse. "It's thready. What did you do?" "I saved his life," Rosalind said, standing up, her small frame rigid with indignation. "He was poisoned. With aconite. The same poison that I suspect you have been administering to him in the guise of a tonic for his nerves." Dr. Howell's face, already red, went a dangerous shade of purple, then a stark, chalky white. "That is preposterous. Slander. I am a physician, and I am a physician's daughter. I know the symptoms, and I know the cure. I induced vomiting. and I am treating him for shock. He needs activated charcoal, which I doubt you have, so we will have to settle for burnt toast, powdered, in water. Now, if you please, Mr. Abernathy, scrape the hearth." Dr. Howell gaped at her, speechless. He looked from her to the butler who was actually obeying her, to the Duke, who was still unconscious, but whose breathing was undeniably deepening. The blue tint was fading from his lips. "You," Howell spluttered. "You are that Beaumont girl, the one from Oakhaven, the charlatan, the witch." "I am the woman who just saved the Duke," Rosalind said, her voice like ice. "Which is more than I can say for his physician." Alistair groaned, his eyelids flickering. His gaze found Rosalind. He said nothing, but his hand, a large, strong hand, weakly moved until his fingers brushed the sleeve of her dress. It was a gesture of anchoring, a man lost at sea, clinging to the only solid object in the storm. Rosalind knew, in that moment, that the night was far from over. She had saved him from the poison. She had not yet saved him from the poisoner. The study became a makeshift infirmary. The Duke was too weak to be moved, so Mr. Abernathy and a footman, summoned by a pale Mrs. Davies, lifted him onto a long sofa near the fire. Dr. Howell, thoroughly checkmated and terrified, was hovering uselessly by the door. "You may leave, Doctor," Rosalind said, not looking up from her patient. She was bathing the Duke's face with a cool cloth. "I will not. I am his physician. I must observe." "You will observe from that chair," Rosalind commanded, pointing to a seat in the far corner. "You will not touch him. You will not prescribe anything. You will simply watch, and you will answer my questions." Howell, seeing the murderous look in Abernathy's eyes, sank into the chair, his black bag on his knees. The hours ticked by. It was a long, slow battle. Rosalind administered the powdered charcoal, forcing the gritty black sludge past the Duke's lips. She monitored his pulse, which was slowly, painfully, finding a steadier rhythm. She listened to his breathing. Mrs. Davies, her earlier hostility replaced by a grudging, terrified respect, shuttled back and forth with fresh water and warm blankets. "Who gave you the tonic, Doctor?" Rosalind asked, into the quiet, her voice cutting. Howell flinched. "It was a new formulation. From London. For anxieties." "Who gave it to you? It was not from a London apothecary. It was from Lord Julian Vane, wasn't it?" The silence that followed was heavier and more toxic than the storm. Dr. Howell's head snapped up, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated fear. I saw him tonight," Rosalind said softly. "I saw him arguing with the Duke. I saw the Duke throw him out, and I saw Lord Julian see me." Abernathy made a small, strangled sound. "Lord Julian, but he is his Grace's cousin, his heir." "Precisely," Rosalind said. "The only thing standing between Lord Julian and the Blackwood title is the Duke himself." "It's a lie," Howell blustered, finding his voice. Lord Julian, he is a gentleman. He worried for his cousin's health. He said the Duke was melancholic, overwrought. The tonic was to calm him. Aconite, in small, repeated doses, mimics a wasting sickness," Rosalind said, her voice clinical, as if she were reciting from one of her father's textbooks. "Headaches, stomach pain, nausea, a general malaise. The nervous stomach Mr. Abernathy spoke of. It would have gone on for months, perhaps a year, until his heart simply stopped. No one would have suspected. They would have called it grief. A broken heart over his late wife." She looked at Howell. "But someone grew impatient tonight, didn't they? Someone wanted it finished. The dose in that decanter wasn't a tonic. It was an execution." Dr. Howell broke. He slumped forward, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He knew, he wept. He knew about my debts, the gambling he paid them, all of them. He said it was a simple favor, just to administer the tonic. He said it was harmless, a simple herbal remedy. I swear I didn't know not until tonight, when he delivered the new bottle himself. He said the Duke's condition was worsening, and he needed a stronger dose. "He gave you the bottle tonight?" Rosalind pressed. "Yes, just after he argued with the Duke. He met me on the drive. He seemed agitated. He told me to put the whole bottle in the decanter. He said the Duke was distraught and needed a full night's sleep." Howell looked up, his face a mask of pathetic terror. "I did as he said. I poured it in. I am ruined. I am a murderer." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Rosalind said. "You are a fool, Dr. Howell, and a coward, but the murderer is Lord Julian Vane." A faint groan came from the sofa. Alistair's eyes were open. He was conscious. He had heard. His grey eyes, no longer clouded by pain, but blazing with a cold, terrifying fury, fixed on Dr. Howell. He tried to speak, but his throat was too raw. He raised a shaky hand and pointed, not at Howell, but at the telephone on his desk. A new, modern contraption. "Abernathy," Alistair rasped, the single word costing him immense effort. "Get the constable." Abernathy, galvanized, moved to the telephone. "Yes, Your Grace. At once." As the butler frantically cranked the handle to ring the operator, Mrs. Davies spoke from the doorway, her voice a trembling whisper. "My lord, there is another problem. Lord Julian. He has returned. He is in the great hall. He says he forgot his walking stick, and he wishes to apologize to you. And he has 2 of his men with him." Rosalind's blood turned to ice. They were trapped. The poisoner had not fled. He had returned to ensure his work was done. Alistair pushed himself up on one elbow, his body shaking with a combination of weakness and rage. "Abernathy, the desk. My pistol." Abernathy hung up the telephone. "He's not armed, Your Grace. Not you. Not in this state." He looked at Rosalind, a desperate, silent plea. Rosalind understood. She had saved the Duke's life. Now, she had to save them all. "Mrs. Davies," Rosalind said, her voice calm and steady, "go to Lord Julian. Tell him the Duke is resting. Tell him he is terribly ill and that Dr. Howell is with him, but that he cannot be disturbed. Stall him." "And us?" Abernathy whispered. "You and I," Rosalind said, grabbing a heavy fireplace poker, "are going to bar this door." The Duke of Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in England, was helpless. His life, his home, and his future were in the hands of his butler, his housekeeper, and the half-drowned stranger he had almost turned away. The sun, when it finally rose, was a sickly, pale yellow, filtering through the rain-streaked windows of the study. It illuminated a scene of quiet desperation. The heavy oak desk was shoved against the door, a flimsy barricade at best. Dr. Howell was still weeping silently in his corner. Mr. Abernathy stood by the desk, armed with the Duke's empty pistol. Alistair had confirmed his ammunition was locked in a separate drawer. Rosalind held the poker, her knuckles white. On the sofa, the Duke was visibly stronger. The charcoal and the passage of time had done their work. The poison's grip was broken, leaving behind a profound weakness, but a sharp, clear-eyed fury. They had heard Julian pacing the great hall for an hour. Mrs. Davies had clearly failed to convince him. Then pounding, "Alistair, open this door! Mrs. Davies tells me you are gravely ill. As your heir, I demand to see you." Julian's voice was slick with false concern. "Go away," Alistair called out, his voice a harsh rasp. "I will not. I am breaking down the door, Alistair. For your own good." A heavy thud rattled the desk. Then another. The men he'd brought were using a bench from the hall as a battering ram. "This is insane," Rosalind whispered. "He's going to kill us all just to what? Finish the job?" "He can't," Alistair said, struggling to sit up. Abernathy rushed to his side. "He can't let me live, not now. He knows Howell is here. He knows you saw him." He looked at Rosalind. "He has to silence everyone." The door frame splintered. A large crack appeared near the lock. "Abernathy," Alistair ordered. "The window, the terrace. Get Miss Beaumont out of here. Go. That's an order." "I will not leave you, Your Grace," Abernathy said, his chin set. "And I am not leaving either," Rosalind said, hefting the poker. "He thinks you are alone and dying. He thinks we are a doctor, a butler, and a vagrant girl. He is underestimating us." With a final, deafening crash, the door burst open, sending the desk sliding back. Lord Julian Vane stood in the doorway, flanked by his two thugs, burly men who looked more like dock workers than companions. Julian's mask of concern was gone. His face was a picture of cold, aristocratic rage. His eyes went from the weeping Dr. Howell to Abernathy and his useless pistol, to Rosalind and her poker, and finally to the Duke, who was on his feet, leaning on the sofa, but very much alive. "Alive," Julian said, his voice flat. "How disappointing." "Julian," the Duke spat, "you always were an impatient fool. You couldn't even wait for the slow poison to work." "It was your fault," Julian shrieked, his composure shattering. "You and your blasted miners. You were bankrupting us. I tried to save the estate. Elspeth saw it too. She was going to tell you I'd been managing the books. She had to be stopped." Alistair's face went white. Elspeth. Her horse the saddle strap. "She was a better rider than any man," Julian sneered. "A broken strap shouldn't have been a problem. But a little laudanum in her morning tea, it made her clumsy. A tragic, tragic accident, just as this was going to be a tragic, tragic decline." He nodded to his men. "Finish it, all of them. Dr. Howell first. He's the weakest." As the two men advanced, Dr. Howell fainted. "Now!" Rosalind shouted. It was not a well-reasoned plan. It was pure, desperate instinct. As the first thug reached for Abernathy, the butler, with a surprisingly strong roar, swung the heavy butt end of the pistol and cracked the man across the temple. He went down like a sack of stones. The second man turned on Rosalind. He laughed when he saw the poker. "Put that down, little bird." Rosalind didn't swing. She lunged, as her father had taught her in their self-defense lessons. She jammed the hot, sharp point of the poker, not at his chest, but at his foot, right through the thin leather of his boot. He screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound, and crumpled, clutching his impaled foot. Julian stood, stunned, for one perfect, silent second. He looked at his two men, both incapacitated. He looked at the Duke, who was now standing, unsupported, a look of murderous intent on his face. And then Lord Julian Vane did the only thing a coward can do. He ran. He bolted from the study, back into the great hall. "Abernathy, the police!" Alistair roared, finding his voice. "They are on their way, Your Grace," the butler yelled, already on the telephone. "I may have implied the house was on fire. They should be here presently." Rosalind, shaking with adrenaline, dropped the poker. It clattered on the floor. She looked at her hands, at the Duke, at the two groaning men on the floor, and at the fainted doctor. The sun was now fully up. Morning had come. Alistair Vane walked, slowly, across the room. He stopped in front of her. He was pale, dishevelled, and still weak, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the mud on her dress, the soot on her hands from the poker, the defiant, terrified set of her jaw. "You," he said, his voice rough. "My one night of shelter, Miss Rosalind Beaumont." He swayed, the adrenaline leaving him. Rosalind, acting on instinct, grabbed his arm to steady him. "You saved my life," he whispered, his weight leaning on her. "By morning," she whispered back, her own legs threatening to buckle. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by something she couldn't or wouldn't dare to name. "I believe," the Duke said, his voice firming, "that we have a great many things to discuss. Abernathy, see to our guests. And then, please, bring Miss Beaumont and me a pot of very strong tea." In the drawing room. The aftermath was a blur of organized chaos. The arrival of the constabulary, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm, was a welcome sight. The two thugs were carted off, one cursing, one weeping over his skewered foot. Dr. Howell, having been revived with smelling salts, provided a full, blubbering confession that implicated Julian in not only the attempted murder of the Duke, but the accidental death of his first wife, Elspeth. Lord Julian Vane was apprehended less than 5 miles away, his horse lame, his fine clothes spattered with mud. He was, as Mr. Abernathy later reported with grim satisfaction, apoplectic and demanding a lawyer. By noon, Blackwood Manor was quiet again, but it was a different silence. The heavy, oppressive tension that had suffocated the house was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp air of a truth revealed. Rosalind found herself in the Duke's grand drawing room, a room of cream and gold that was now awash with sunlight. She was wearing not her own ruined dress, but a simple, elegant day dress of dark blue wool, which Mrs. Davies had found for her. The housekeeper had even brought her a tray with the tea, her expression one of profound, unspoken gratitude. Rosalind had finished her story, about her father, about Mr. Gower, about her flight from Oakhaven. Alistair sat opposite her, not on a formal chair, but on the ottoman at her feet, a gesture of intimacy that was not lost on her. He had listened without interruption, his face thoughtful. "Mr. Gower," he said finally, his voice still rough, "will be dealt with. I will send a man to Oakhaven. He will not only clear your name, he will ensure that Gower's reputation is re-evaluated. My lawyers will enjoy it. Your Grace, you don't have to." "Alistair," he corrected her. "My name is Alistair, and yes, I do. After last night, there is very little I would not do for you." He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the now peaceful grounds. "This house I have hated for 2 years, ever since Elspeth died. Julian was right about one thing. I have been a ghost. I locked myself away, drowning in grief and suspicion." He turned back to her. "I never believed Elspeth's death was an accident. She was the best horsewoman I'd ever known. But I had no proof. The suspicion, the not knowing it was its own kind of poison. I saw enemies everywhere. I became cold, hard like the stone of this house." He walked back to her, and this time he sat on the sofa beside her. "Ironic, isn't it? The one man I thought I could trust, my own blood, was the one slowly killing me. And the one person I should have turned away, a stranger from the storm, she was the only one who could save me." Rosalind looked down at her hands. "I only did what my father taught me. What was right." "No," Alistair said, his voice soft. He gently took her hand. His was warm and strong. "You did more than that. You were brave. You were intelligent. You saw the truth when everyone else, myself included, was blind. You woke me up, Rosalind." His words hung in the air, charged with an intensity that had nothing to do with poison or peril. It was the simple, terrifying and beautiful charge of two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. "Julian," Alistair continued, his voice hardening, "wanted the Blackwood fortune. He will not get it. He wanted the title. He will be stripped of it. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. Dr. Howell will likely testify against him to save his own skin, and in doing so will lose his license and his freedom. "And what of you, Your Grace Alistair?" Rosalind asked, finding her courage. "I am alive, thanks to you, and I find I have a great deal of work to do. The mines in Cornwallis, the estate, and myself." He paused, and a look of vulnerability crossed his features, making him look younger, less like a duke and more like a man. "Your one night is long over, Miss Beaumont. You are free to go, of course. I will give you a carriage, an escort, enough money to start a new life anywhere you choose. Your name is cleared." Rosalind felt a sudden, unexpected pang of loss. To leave? After all this? To go back to what? Her old life was gone. Oakhaven was no longer her home. She pulled her hand gently from his. "I see. That is very generous of you. However," Alistair said, a faint, almost shy smile touching his lips, "I was hoping you would not choose that." "What else is there?" she asked. "Blackwood Manor is large, and it is in desperate need of a great many things. It needs a conscience. It needs a mind. It needs, I am told, a healer." Rosalind's heart beat faster. "You are offering me a position? As your physician?" Alistair laughed, a real, warm laugh that echoed in the sunny room. "A woman as a physician? Society would be appalled, which I find is an excellent reason to do it." He grew serious. "I am offering you a position, yes, but physician is not the title I had in mind." He stood and offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. They stood facing each other, equals. "I am offering you a home, Rosalind. I am offering you my protection, my resources, and my profound respect. Stay. Help me run this estate. Help me bring it back to life. Help me bring me back to life." It was not a proposal of marriage. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more rare, and, to Rosalind, far more valuable. It was an offer of partnership. "I am not a servant, Alistair," she said softly, "to be given a position." "No," he agreed, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "You are not. You are the lady of this house, in every way that matters, if you will have it." The weeks that followed were not a quiet revolution. They were a swift, decisive, and resounding one. Blackwood Manor, a house that had been sleeping under a shroud of grief and poison, awoke. Its windows were thrown open, its corridors echoed with purpose, and at the center of the whirlwind was not the Duke, but the physician's daughter. The local gentry was, to put it mildly, baffled. Heard Blackwood's recovered? Lord Ashworth, their nearest and nosiest neighbour, remarked at a tense dinner Alistair insisted on hosting. "And taken on a new protégé, I see." He leered at Rosalind, who was seated not at the foot of the table, but at the Duke's right hand. Alistair's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, the air in the dining room chilled by 20 degrees. "Miss Beaumont is not my protégé, Ashworth," Alistair said, his voice a low, warning rumble. "She is my partner, and she is the woman who saved my life. I would tread carefully." Ashworth, unnerved, turned to Rosalind with a patronizing smile. "Ah, a nurse, then. A fine and noble calling for a woman. Tell me, Miss Beaumont, do your talents extend to gardening? My wife is having terrible trouble with her roses this season." Rosalind, who had been studying the estate ledgers all afternoon, placed her napkin on the table. "I know little of roses, Lord Ashworth," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "but I do know a great deal about fallow land. Your north pasture, for example. You've been planting wheat on it for 6 straight years. You are starving the soil. If you don't rotate to clover or vetch within the season, You will have a field of dust by next spring, and your tenants will be in the poorhouse." Abernathy, standing by the sideboard, choked back a cough that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Ashworth's face went from purple to pale. "I hardly see how that is." "Miss Beaumont sees," Alistair interjected, his eyes gleaming with an emotion Rosalind hadn't seen before. "Pride. She sees everything. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have estate matters to discuss. Abernathy will show you out." Rosalind felt a thrill, not of victory, but of sheer, unadulterated competence. She had a voice, and more surprisingly, the Duke of Blackwood was making sure everyone heard it. Her first act within the house was to dismantle the regime of fear and neglect Dr. Howell had left. She found Mrs. Davies in her small sitting room, rubbing her gnarled knuckles. "Dr. Howell said it was old age," the housekeeper said, her voice stiff, still wary of this new girl who was not a servant but not a lady. "Old age is a fact, Mrs. Davies," Rosalind said, setting down a tray. On it was a steaming cup of dark tea. "Suffering from it is a choice. My father found that a tea brewed from willow bark and meadowsweet can greatly ease inflammation. Please." Mrs. Davies looked at the cup, then at Rosalind. "You brewed this?" "I did. Now drink it. And I have also instructed His Grace that your duties will no longer include polishing the silver. We will hire another girl for that. You are to manage the house, not scrub it." The housekeeper took the cup, her hand trembling. A single difficult tear rolled down her cheek. "His Grace, he has never been concerned with such things." "He is now," Rosalind said softly. "We both are." But the true test came not from within the walls of the manor, but from the source of Alistair's greatest burden, the mines in Cornwallis. "Julian wanted to close them," Alistair said, standing in the study, now their study. "I refused, but I have been managing them from a distance, sending money. That is not enough. I must go." "Then I will go with you," Rosalind said, not as a question. "Rosalind, it is a hard place. It's rough. It's no place for a woman," she finished, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not a porcelain doll, Alistair. I am a physician's daughter. Sickness, hardship, and stubborn men are my specialty. If those mines are draining your estate, we must see why. And if they are harming the people who work them, that is a sickness I am trained to treat." He looked at her for a long moment, the man and the Duke warring in his eyes. The man won. "Pack a warm cloak," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And your sturdiest boots. I suspect you will be wading through mud." He was not wrong. Cornwallis was a world of grey. Grey sky, grey hills of slag, and grey men, their faces permanently etched with coal dust. The mine manager, a thick-set man named Trelawney, was openly hostile. "The Duke, Your Grace," he said, bowing to Alistair, then looking at Rosalind as if she were a new, strange species of insect. "And the lady?" "Miss Beaumont," Alistair said, his voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. "She is my personal physician and estate advisor. She will have access to everything, the men, the ledgers, the mines themselves." Trelawney's jaw tightened. "As you wish, Your Grace. But the mine is no place for skirts." "Then I will be sure to lift them," Rosalind snapped. For 2 weeks they descended into the earth. Alistair, to his credit, went with her, his fine clothes quickly ruined by dust and water. Rosalind was appalled. She saw men working in tunnels with no proper ventilation. She saw children sorting coal with bare, bleeding hands, and she heard the constant, racking miner's cough that echoed from the village, while Alistair, furious, tore into Trelawney and the ledgers, finding Julian had been skimming profits for years, Leaving the mine to rot, Rosalind set up a clinic in a disused storage shed. She did not ask for permission. She simply did it. She requisitioned blankets, she boiled water, and she began to treat the families. She lanced boils, she set a boy's broken arm, and she handed out tins of a strong, herbal salve for the coal rash that plagued them. One evening, a young woman, barely 20, ran into the shed, frantic. "It's my mother. She's taken the fever. She's breathing water." Rosalind grabbed her bag and ran through the mud to a tiny, cold cottage. The woman inside was in the grip of pneumonia, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Alistair!" Rosalind shouted, seeing him arguing with Trelawney by the mine entrance. He heard the panic in her voice and was at her side in seconds. "What is it?" "I need her breathing upright. And she's cold. The fire is almost out." He didn't hesitate. He didn't send a servant. He, the Duke of Blackwood, stalked to the manager's office, kicked open the door, and emerged a moment later with an entire scuttle of the manager's private high-grade coal. He dumped it on the meagre fire, which roared to life. Then he went to the sick woman. "What do you need?" "Hold her," Rosalind commanded. "Sit on the bed and prop her up against your chest. We have to keep her lungs from filling. I need to brew a poultice." And so, for the rest of the night, Alistair Vane, a man rumoured to be as cold as his granite manor, sat in a miner's hovel, holding a dying stranger in his arms, while Rosalind, her face smeared with soot, ground herbs and fed the woman broth, drop by drop. By dawn, the fever had broken. The woman was sleeping, her breathing easier. Alistair and Rosalind stumbled out into the pale grey morning, exhausted, filthy, and victorious. He looked at her, at the grime on her cheek, and the fierce, beautiful exhaustion in her eyes. "You," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "are the most extraordinary person I have ever known." "We," she corrected him, leaning against him for just a moment, her strength failing, "are a formidable team." He put his arm around her, and they walked back to the inn, not as a duke and a commoner, but as two people who had fought a battle, side by side, and won. They returned to Blackwood Manor in the late autumn. The air was crisp, the leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, and the house felt, for the first time, like a home. The staff, healthy and secure, greeted them not with fear, but with genuine warm smiles. That evening, Alistair found Rosalind in the library. His library, the room that had nearly been his tomb. It was now her office. The grand desk was covered in her notes. She was poring over a treatise on crop rotation. "You will ruin your eyes," he said, lighting a lamp beside her. She looked up, a smudge of ink on her nose, and smiled. "And you are interrupting my research. This new method of fallowing fields could increase the tenant farm's yield by 20%. It's fascinating." He smiled and took the book from her hands, closing it. "The fields can wait. One night. I, however, am finding I am impatient. Like Julian." She stiffened slightly, a shadow passing over her face. A poor choice of words, perhaps. "A deliberate one," he said. He sat on the edge of the desk, looking down at her, his expression serious. "I have been patient, Rosalind. I have given you time. I have given you space. I have watched you heal my staff, my lands, and my home. You have brought light back into this house. You have brought me back." "I have only been useful, Alistair," she said, her voice quiet. "You have been essential," he countered. "And I find I am a selfish man. I do not want Miss Beaumont as my physician, or my advisor, or my partner in business." He slid off the desk and went down on one knee, there on the Persian rug that still, if you looked closely, bore the faint stain of spilled, poisoned brandy. Rosalind's breath caught. Her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely, seemed to stop. "Rosalind," he said, taking her ink-stained hands in his, "I was a ghost in my own home. I was a man waiting to die. You arrived in a storm, and you did not just save my life, you gave me one." He looked up at her, his grey eyes, once so cold, now burning with a warm, steady fire. "I am not a duke offering you a position. I am a man, Alestined, who is hopelessly, completely, and eternally in love with you. I am in love with your mind, with your courage, with your stubbornness, and with the way you see the world, not as it is, but as it should be. Marry me, Rosalind Beaumont. Be my wife. Be my duchess. Be my partner in all things. Not because I am ordering you, but because I am nothing without you." Rosalind felt tears well in her eyes, not of fear or sadness, but of a joy so profound it ached. She thought of the girl cowering in the storm, soaked and terrified, begging for a place in the stables, and she looked at the man kneeling before her, the most powerful man she had ever known, offering her his entire world. "I am not the woman who arrived that night," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," he said, his grip on her hands tightening. "You are not. You are the woman who stayed, the woman who fought, the woman who rebuilt a man and his home from the ashes." "Alistair," she said, a smile breaking through her tears as she pulled him to his feet. "You are not in my debt, and I am not a position to be filled." "No," he said, standing so close she could feel the heat from his body. "You are the lady of this house, in every way that matters. If you will have me." "Yes," she whispered, her hands moving from his to his face. "Yes, Alistair, I will have you. And I will marry you." He kissed her then. It was not the chaste kiss of a drawing-room courtship. It was a kiss of raw, desperate gratitude. It was the kiss of a man who had been starved, and a woman who had finally found a home. It was the sealing of a promise, made in the shadow of death, and fulfilled in the light of a new dawn. The one night of shelter had become a lifetime, not of safety, but of a shared, bright and extraordinary future. And so, the Duke's cold fortress became a home, and the woman who arrived with nothing became the one who saved everything. Rosalind and Alistair's story is proof that sometimes our greatest salvation comes from the most unexpected stranger. What did you think of Julian's betrayal? Were you expecting the twist about the first wife, Elspeth? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. Your engagement helps this channel so much. If you loved this journey of drama, danger, and romance, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with a fellow story lover, and most importantly, clicking subscribe and ringing the bell. We have so many more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.